Today we're reading Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2. We left off end of chapter 1. You'll recall Daniel and his friends and a lot of the best of the best were taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar back to Babylon, and that's where they are. And Nebuchadnezzar's whole point of this was to inculcate them and brainwash them into the doctrine of the Babylonians. So that would be things like the food, the religion, the God, the way of life, everything. And he was going to be able to then use them in his own empire to service the empire. And that's where we left off chapter 1. We also recall Daniel lived at least, all 70 years while in captivity. And he was a teenager when he arrived. So we know he was close to 90 when he finally died. And under his, he was under these kings that I listed here. You see the center section is Babylonia. So Nebuchadnezzar was the first king he was under. And he survived all the way down to Cyrus the Great before he finally died. Cyrus was a Persian king who overthrew Babylon. So as we get here into chapter 2, this is the chapter where Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And as I read through this, you'll see that in his dream, he doesn't know what it means. So he calls his magicians and his sorcerers and his people in his administration and so forth and asks them, tell me what my dream means. And of course, they have no clue. And they're phonies, basically. And they say, well, why don't you tell us what you dreamed? And then we'll tell you what it means. And he goes, no, you need to tell me what I dreamed and then tell me what it means. And if you can't do that, off with your heads. So they're scrambling around trying to figure out how to answer him. They tell him, well, nobody could do that. He says, well, then you're all going to die. But Daniel gets the word about this. And so Daniel says, well, I can do that. So Daniel tells him what the dream is and then tells him what it means. And the dream is about this statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreams about. And the statue, as we're going to learn through the reading here, and Pastor Jesse's already been teaching us about it, the head is made of gold, and that's actually Nebuchadnezzar's head. This is a giant statue, by the way. The chest part is silver, and that's Persia, who ends up overthrowing Babylon, of which Nebuchadnezzar was the head. Not when it was overthrown, he died, but Persia was next. And then the middle part, the thighs or the waist, and that is Greece. That's Alexander the Great. And then the bottom part, the legs, that's Rome and the revised Roman Empire down on the toes. And as you go down the statue, each particular metal gets weaker and weaker. And then we'll see here again in chapter 2, God will destroy this statue and there will be another kingdom, and that'll be God's kingdom that will take over the entire earth. So that's where we're going with this. I noticed in verse 4, and I was going to point that out, it says, then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. And this is unique here because remember the first 6 or 7 chapters are regarding the history of the Gentile nations. And Aramaic was a common language in Babylon and in Persia. And so this is written from this point on up to the end of chapter 7 in Aramaic. That makes sense because that's what we're talking about. It's the Gentiles. After chapter 7, it switches back to Hebrew because from that point on, it's prophetic about Israel and the history of the world through God's kingdom. So naturally, we go back to Hebrew. When I get to verse 31 through 43, that'll be Daniel interpreting what the statue means. We just covered that. Let's see. We have an interesting point I came across was when you get down to the legs of iron, that's Rome, and that was in about, just before the birth of Christ. Remember, this set the stage for the birth of Christ. He was born during Romans rule, and that's where we are, like the book of Acts. That's all under Rome. And so this whole statue thing boils down to getting us to the first advent, the birth of Christ, and on beyond that. So that was important, and I found that when I was doing some of the studying. Maybe I already knew it. I just didn't remember that I knew it. Okay, so I want to make a point about Nebuchadnezzar. This guy was the most powerful and influential pagan king in the Bible. He was the guy, and he thought of himself as God. Most of the kings of this era thought of themselves as a god. This guy thought of himself as God. At least it was the Babylonian God. But you remember the movie The 300. The Artaxerxes, I think it was Artaxerxes, coming to have the battle with the 300. He was, in the movie, he was different color of everybody. He was larger than everybody. This is because he thought of himself as a god, and that's the way they portrayed him in the movie. Nebuchadnezzar was even bigger than that, and everyone was scared of the guy. He would flip out at times and just make crazy things like, if you don't tell me what my dream is, I'm going to kill all y'all. So they were super scared of the guy, and he was afraid of nothing, absolutely nothing. Remember, he built these hanging gardens that I have a picture of up there. These are considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. It was an ingenious design, and to get the water up to the top and water all the gardens and so forth. He had that built. He like I say, nothing scared him. Nothing made him tremble. Nothing terrified him. Nothing. There was nothing he could do that he wasn't afraid to do. Again, he was very cruel. People were scared of him. Look at verse 5. It says, this is where one of the times where he blows his top. He says, "The command from me is firm. If you don't make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap." And as they continue to tell him no one could figure this out, he goes on in verse 12. He says, because of this, the king became very indignant, very furious, and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So, just like that, if you didn't do it, off with your head. He was going to take care of you. But to emphasize this point, right off the bat, verse 1 of our chapter says, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Well, nothing could upset this guy. But here, this dream is what troubled him and actually terrified him. And that's why he wanted the interpretation. So again, nothing before him would make him tremble or scare him. But one thing did, and that's the dream that God sent to him. That's what shook him up. So that's where we are with this chapter. So let me get started. I'm going to start reading here at verse 1 of Daniel chapter 2. Now in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king gave orders to call the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. The king said to them, "I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream." Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, "O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation." The king replied to the Chaldeans, "The command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. If you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation." They answered a second time and said, "Let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation." The king replied, I know for certain that you are bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command from me is firm, that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, There is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there is no one else who could declare it to the king except gods, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious, and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. And he said to Arioch, the king's commander, For what reason is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, about the matter, so that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel said, Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changed the times and the epochs. He removed kings and established kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and in the light dwells, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. Therefore Daniel went in to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and spoke to him as follows, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king. Then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel to the king's presence and spoke to him as follows, I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. The king said to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered before the king and said, As for the mystery about which the king has inquired, whether wise men, conjurers, magicians, or diviners are able to declare it to the king. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in latter years. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turn to what would take place in the future, and he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me more than in any other living man, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large, and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of the statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until the stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on the feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time, and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell you its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. After you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, and then a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron. Inasmuch as iron crushes and shattered all things, so, like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with the common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong, and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel, and gave orders to present him an offering and a fragrant incense. The king answered Daniel and said, Surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel made a request to the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon, while Daniel was at the king's court.